Since taking control of Kabul, the Taliban has promised to respect women's rights within the framework of Islamic law, as well as offering media freedom and amnesty for government officials. When questioned about freedom of speech, a spokesperson for the Taliban said the inquiry should be posed to U.S. companies like Facebook, who claim to promote it while still censoring. Let's take a look.
دا سوال خو باید فیسبوک له ادارې سره وي د بیان د ازادي دعوت دوی کوي او دلته خلک د بیان د ازادي.
This question should be asked to those people who are claiming to be promoters of freedom of speech, who do not allow publication of all information. I can ask Facebook company. This question should be asked to them.
Joining us now to discuss is Democratic strategist and Senior Vice President of Firehouse Strategies, Michael Starr Hopkins, and Oklahoma Transportation Commissioner and former Oklahoma House Speaker, T.W. Shannon. Welcome to you both. So I'm going to go to you first, Michael. What do you make of this, the Taliban coming out against some of our big tech corporations and their censorship?
I mean, it's great whataboutism, but the Taliban has a history. They destroyed historical antiques. They've, repressed women. This isn't new. We know who the Taliban is. They can try to rebrand themselves, but they are who they are, and nothing's going to change in terms of how they treat women.
And TW, I want to get your take on this, and maybe I'll play devil's advocate or Taliban advocate here, and raise the question.
That's
of
dangerous.
What do you do? I mean, what do you do when you have a government in power that is beginning to be recognized by other countries? Do you allow them to communicate with the world through these dominant social media platforms? And I guess relatedly, TW, how does the conservative movement feel about this new ally that they have in their censorship fight against big tech?
Well, I would tell you, first of all, I think all Americans are really, upset about what they've seen happen over the last 48 hours. I mean, really, if you look at the last 7 months of the Biden-Harris, regime, the only people really that have been building back better really is the Taliban. I mean, it's really caused many to question Joe Biden's ability to lead. And I think the idea that even, the Taliban is questioning the way that Facebook and other, big tech giants are censoring Americans, I think it should really cause us to wake up. But I think the focus really shouldn't be on what's happening with America. It should be really focused on how the Taliban really are, the Taliban 2.0 is still the Taliban. They're still going to rely on Sharia law. They're going to cause people to be judged based upon their own interpretation of what Islam is. And it's one that's not going to be favorable to women, and it's not going to be favorable to most men and most women at large, especially those young women.
I'm really curious from kind of everybody on the panel, if you think that the Taliban should be allowed on Facebook and Twitter. I just kind of, wanted to kind of get the feel on that one. That brings up a pretty big conundrum, doesn't it? Michael, I'll start with you. I mean, do you think they should be allowed?
No, I don't. I think the Taliban is a terrorist organization. I don't think they're an actual government. And the fact that they came in the way that they did and basically couped the government, I don't think they should be recognized. I understand why Russia and China are recognizing them, because this is a proxy war. But Facebook, companies like that, who are platforms to spread information, shouldn't give them a platform.
Well, what about, TW, what about Saudi Arabia? Should the Saudi Arabian government be able to be on Twitter, Facebook? They embrace and execute Sharia law. Executed an American journalist in the consulate in Turkey. We could list all of their crimes, but the distinctions between the Saudi Arabian government and the Taliban government are not especially strong, and may kind of militate in favor of the Taliban in some ways. This new Taliban.
Well, listen, I think the new reality that we face is that big tech and social media platforms, they've really become the public square. And I really appreciate, Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, who wrote an opinion, who even said that perhaps it's time to start regulating them like utilities, because ultimately, they drive the conversation and they create a platform. And when you have big tech companies that have silenced the president of the United States, I think for me and I think for most conservatives, the rules should just be applied, they should at least be applied fairly and across the board the same, but unfortunately, they're not. There's clearly a pick and choose about who these big tech companies allow, and there's a clear bias against conservatives, because I know many conservatives who have been silenced, who have been harassed by big tech giants, and certainly the biggest example is the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Right, and I think I want to make a quick point. I think Michael made an interesting one, which is, listen, should we really, I want to be careful on this program to not act like the Taliban is a legitimate government. It's not been recognized as such by the United States. China, to my understanding, is the only standing government that has come out and acknowledged it. But it does open this bigger question. So if countries around the world start acknowledging it as a legitimate government, we allow the CCP to have a platform. We allow the Iranian Ayatollah to have a platform where he says things like death to Israelis, death to Americans. But then we have the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, banned from social media. So there's massive, massive inconsistencies here with our big tech overlords, that there is going to have to be a breaking point where we decide you are a total free speech platform where terrorists can organize, you can share misinformation, or you're going to monitor it, but there's going to be consistency. And we're in this weird no man's land where neither exist.
Well, and when you think about the way that the Taliban, overthrew the Afghani government, they were using social platforms to coordinate and to communicate their message out. And so the idea that they're not being banned, but you would ban the president of the United States and other conservatives who are just trying to be heard and present a separate voice, I think it's a really scary time in American history. In fact, when you look at just recently, the Department of Homeland Security issued new potential terror threats where they listed people who question mandates about the vaccine, people who question ideas about election security. They deemed those folks terrorists. I mean, it's a really scary time in American history. And unfortunately, the left has partnered with the big tech overlords to create an atmosphere that is hostile to conservatives. That's pretty consistent across the board. And we can talk all day about not recognizing the Taliban government. I certainly don't believe they should be recognized. I still remember how they aided and abetted al-Qaeda and allowed Americans to be attacked on 9/11. But unfortunately, the Biden-Harris administration has left them billions of dollars worth of American technology that I think puts all Americans at risk.
I would think we ought to recognize them and just acknowledge reality. I know, Kim, you were making that point the other day. Kim, I'm curious for your take. This is a messy question. Does the Taliban deserve its Facebook page?
Well, I'm a free speech kind of absolutist, I suppose. So I do think that as long as you're not calling for a crime or committing a crime on social media, then you should be heard, and especially government leaders. And I do think we should recognize the Taliban as the official government of Afghanistan now, or will soon be. And they should absolutely be heard, apparently, on social media. And I know that that's it is tough, right? It's a tough situation. But again, as long as they're not calling for or committing any crime on social media, then we do need to allow that free speech.
Kim, I've got to jump in here. Are you saying that the Taliban has not committed a crime? Have we forgotten when they were leading the Afghan government back in 2005? The thousands of hundreds of thousands of people that were executed and killed under this brutal regime. I mean, if ever there was a criminal organization,
I say as long as they're not committing a crime on social media. So I do believe that criminals should be allowed on social media, people that have served prison time, people that maybe even are in prison, I suppose. But as long as they're not actually committing the crime on social media.
And also, some of this is branding. They're on WhatsApp, which is a Facebook property. I'm trying to line up an interview with a Taliban representative for the Intercept podcast for this week. And the contacts that I've been given have been on WhatsApp. It's probably the most popular communication device in Afghanistan, and it's owned by Facebook, and it's used by the Taliban. So in some ways, it's like Facebook's fine to do that, because they're going to take less blowback for that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of irony in this, though, because Republicans are supposed to be the free market capitalist. And there's been a lot of push now to regulate private companies because they don't like what they're doing. And not because of the actual company itself, but because they feel like they've been bullied or treated differently. that's a little problematic. Like, they're settling a score. That's not how it's supposed to work. Now, I am actually for regulating Facebook and regulating public marketplaces, but it's weird to see Republicans now take that stance.
Well, and there's also sort of a middle ground here that we haven't touched on, which is the notion of, going full free speech and allowing anyone on a platform so long as they're not using it to, spread terrorism and to organize. But then there's the question over, do we flag disinformation and misinformation, or do we allow blatantly untrue things to just permeate the airwaves and the web waves that may have dangerous consequences down the road? I'd be curious the panel's take.
I mean, I believe that you kind of have to just let it all go. You have to protect speech, even speech that you don't like. COVID's a good example. I think flagging misinformation and disinformation is important so that we don't continue to spread bad information. But I think canceling people's accounts, suspending them, it's probably not the right way to go, because it just ends up inflaming everything and making it worse.
But what if they're in the Taliban? That's why this is such a messy question.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't see the Taliban as a recognized government, so I think they should get treated like an individual, not like a government. I think government has more room to speak and more levity.
So you're fine with individual Taliban being on Facebook or Twitter, just not as an organization or a government?
Yeah, I don't think their designation should be as a government.
And they are. The Taliban's already on social media
Absolutely.
as individual members. They're all over.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Right, because it's hard to chase them all down, and if you were trying to suppress every single one. I think the kind of confusion that expressed in this segment is probably indicative of the way that we're all still thinking through this as a society. And I appreciate TW, Michael, both of you for joining us here.
Thanks for having us.
So
Thank you for having me.
You got it. Next up, Brianna Joy Gray joins us to discuss House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's beef with corporate Democrats when Rising returns.